Welcome to BSW's Tech Dive. Tech Dive.
Submerge the ship.
The show goes technically deep into products you care about. The new, the old, the newish. So put on your gear, close up the hatch, and prepare to
Dive. Submerge the ship.
And now, here's John.
Welcome to this edition of BSW Tech Dive. I am John Lynch, Director of Business Development here at Broadcast Supply Worldwide, BSWUSA.com. And today we are talking about FM processing from the Orban labs. And specifically, we're going to take all of the units except for their newest entry, the XPN Enterprise, which we dealt with on another show. But XPN Enterprise is the unit that now really attracts groups and large installations, several stations in one market. Here we're going to talk about individual stations. We're going to talk about it with the Vice President of Business Development and a great engineer in his own right. It is Mike Pappas from Orban Labs. And Orban has always covered FM processing from the lowest to the highest. Well, we're going to start off doing the same thing. Let's take it from the top. 8700, that's the ultimate from single station processors from Orban, and there are two versions.
Well, thanks, John. Yes, so the 8700i comes in an 8700i, which is our state-of-the-art FM processor, and it has virtually every bell and whistle that you could possibly want. And then we have a slightly feature set reduced 8700i LT, which doesn't have the AOIP and dual power supplies. And from there, we kind of step down. So it depends on what your processing requirements are and what marketplaces you're in, and what your competitors sound like as to what kind of processor you should be looking at buying. And John, we've had a bunch of calls in the last year or so from your customers who've purchased processors or were about to, or pre-sales consultation. And I like the one who called who had a big country and western station and was getting eaten alive by the competitors, and we gave him a suggestion as to what to buy, and it was a little, bit more than they wanted to spend, but they stepped up to the plate and they did it, and they put it on the air, and I kept getting calls going, man, this thing sounds amazing. We are just mopping up the competition out here, and also it helped them fill in some coverage spots that they had issues with. So, we've got basically a price point and a processor for just about every requirement. If you're in a big market, you need that flexibility, and you need all the feature sets. The 8700i is a processor we see go into places with customers that are absolutely looking to own the market in terms of audio quality and loudness and density.
And that's what they're paying for.
That's exactly what you're paying for. And, we have customers that look at something like the 8600 SI, which has the Bob Orban padded MX limiter. Again, lots of loudness, very low distortion. It's one thing to get loud. It's another thing to get loud and do it with very low distortion so you don't drive your listeners away. It's all about, keeping the listeners around, time spent listening. You don't want to churn and burn listeners. You don't want them sampling other stations. You want to keep them locked to your spot on the dial. And that's, processing helps you retain those listeners. The customer that we were discussing earlier bought an 8600 SI because it's got MX limiting in it. And they put it on the air and were completely knocked out. I got a call from the owner and the engineering guy, and they were driving around somewhere out in the middle of somewhere, and they were like, man, we just can't believe how great this sounds, and we've been comparing it to our competitors, and we're eating them alive. Those are the calls that you really like to get, and that was a bit of a step up for them. They were really hoping to spend a little less money, but man, once they got it on the air, they knew that every dollar they spent was worthwhile. for customers that don't need MX limiting, don't need that kind of density, the 5700i is an outstanding product. In fact, it's our best selling processor from a quantity standpoint. We make pallets full of them and ship them, kind of thing. Customers love it. It's easy to set up. It's very reliable, and it sounds great. And then our king of the translators, as it were, is the 5500, and we get a lot of customer uptake for 5500s for their translator stations. They're running 250 watts. They're translating their AM. They need a solid processor that doesn't break the bank, but doesn't embarrass them. And 5500i will certainly do that all day long for them. And we literally cover a price point for virtually every FM broadcaster out there.
Now, you've done something, and we talked about this in another show. One thing that your company has done to try to deal with the supply chain issues that we've been having, and it looks like we're going to be continuing to deal with for some time, and you're working around that.
Well, John, when this whole pandemic hit, and then there were two silicon chip manufacturers that had substantial fires. And, we looked at that and said, once you have a fire at a chip manufacturing plant, it's 2 to 3 years to get the hardware that you need to replace all of that. So this isn't something where you can place an order and get all the chip fabrication equipment in 90 days or 6 months. It's 2 or 3 years. And then it takes you 6 months to a year to get the fabrication plant running to the point where it's building reliable product. And we said, this is going to be a major problem for the industry. And so we went and contacted our contract manufacturer and told them to buy 2 years worth of parts and put them on the shelf, and that we'd pay for them up front, because we knew that being able to deliver was going to be a huge problem. And some of the products that we build use some of the chips that came out of those plants. So we got our CM to buy all the parts we need for a couple of years worth, and we're delivering. And we've had great response from our contract manufacturer. And if you need processing, we can deliver it. And that's the message. And of course, it was expensive and it tied up a lot of capital, but our options were, we either do this or, you quote a delivery that doesn't make sense for anyone. And that's not what we're about.
For those watching, what's kind of the level you would say, hey, you're a 5500 client, you're a 57, you're an 86 SI, or you're an 8700, one of those two? Where's kind of the break point there?
Well, I think a lot of it depends on what's your format and who's your competition in the marketplace. And I think that's the real driving factor. We've got customers that have bought 8600 SIs that are in places that you wouldn't think would need an 8600 SI, and they've done it, and they've said, we've absolutely needed it because we want to absolutely dominate the marketplace. So it's kind of hard to say that, if you're in, Poughkeepsie, you should buy a 5500. If you're in Chicago, you probably ought to be looking at 8700Is. I think a lot of that, there's some other variables there. And customers should call BSW and talk to their salesperson at BSW, because they'll be able to help them out and point them in the right direction, and they can get input from us. And as you know, John, I'm love talking to customers who are pre-sales consulting, as it were, and try to point them in the right direction. And as I keep going back to these guys, because they're just great customers. They were really going to buy a 5700i, and we said, we just don't think it's going to be enough for what you need to get done. And they stepped up and bought an 8700i and SI and put it on the air, and they were like, wow, this was exactly the right move. And again, you just got to ask those questions. You understand the format, understand the competition, understand what they're trying to do in the market, and then make give them a recommendation based on it. But Like I said, small translators, 5500s. Step up from that are 5700Is. Bigger markets, 8600 SI. You need loudness. You're doing a country format or, hip hop or something like that. Where you've got a bunch of other competitors and you want to dominate your spot on the dial. 8600 SI, and then if you just need every bit of it, the 8700 series is kind of where it's at.
The way you phrase that, it reminds me of a line I saw on a bulletin board in a manufacturer back again in another century. And the line was, "Our quality is remembered long after our price is forgotten."
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's the other thing is you open the top of any Orban product and look at what's gone into that unit, and we're not cutting any corners anywhere on any of our products, and that's really the Orban legacy is the stuff's built to last. It runs forever. We get calls weekly from customers who have have processors that have been on the air, analog processors that have been on the air for 30 years. It's just crazy. They just keep running and running and running. And, you're suggesting to them that, perhaps you might want to consider one of our DSP ones just because the world's kind of changed in the last 35 years. But they keep running them, or they're using them as backups. And it's always fun to talk to customers who've got stuff on the air that's been there for 30 years.
FM processing from Orban Labs, 8700 series, 8600 SI, 5700 and 5500. Mike, thanks for joining us. Our guest, Mike Pappas from Orban Labs. And I'm John Lynch. Thanks for joining us for this edition of BSW Tech Dive.
Baby, turn out the light.